Thank you, Sarah. And before I kick off, thank you for all your support this year. You've been a fantastic partner for us. And thank you for everyone who's joined us today. It's been great to have so many people who are looking to drive their own professional development. We're going to talk about what I think is a very interesting and challenging topic for a number of businesses today, and that is encouraging a culture of safe production. And the real challenge when it comes to talking about safety and production is, how do you get the balance right? How do you get it so that you can still make money? Because I mean, the brutal facts are, if you don't make money, you're not going to be in business, and safety is probably not going to be an issue anyway. But how do you do that in a way that's sustainable and that looks after our people? Um, as I said, the challenge of not getting this right is a fewfold. One is, you don't get it right, you can hurt people, but if you get the balance wrong, you can create cynicism, disengagement. You can actually drive your culture backwards. Often the way I see this play out within organizations is, we'll talk safety, but if what you do doesn't match your language, then it actually can have a huge detrimental impact on your organizational culture. And as a leader of mine once said to me, I can't hear what you're saying because what you're doing speaks so loudly. So leaders need to take a big role, obviously, in this process. Yeah, so that's one of the big challenges that goes along with that. The other aspect is, safety can go crazy. Policies, procedures, rules, guidelines choke people, lead them to feeling like they can't make decisions and they can't get the job done. And again, that has a kickback effect as well. So a lot of this conversation today is about, what are some of the considerations in getting the balance right? And how do we know that perhaps the balance isn't right within our organization? So as we jump into this session, there are some downloadable resources that look like this on the screen, and everything that we've got made available will be made available in the recording, as Sarah spoke about earlier, and you can download additional resources from our website. As mentioned earlier, our mission at Sentis is to change the lives of individuals and organisations for the better every day. I'm been 13 years on that journey with Sentis now, and we specialise in the application of psychology and neuroscience to improve leadership capability and engagement and alignment from the workforce. So that's the angle we take. So we're going to dive in and have a conversation first of all here about what culture means and how culture can impact on this idea of creating safe production. But before we do that, a quick poll, and I'll ask Sarah to pop this up on the screen in just a moment. So the question that we're going to ask you to get you thinking about this within your organization is, in your organization, how many workers do you estimate experience pressure to prioritize production over safety? Okay, so I'll say that again. In your organization, how many workers do you estimate experience pressure to prioritize production over safety? Is it less than 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, or more than 80%? So this is on a day-to-day basis. In some way, an individual feels that they put safety second to get the job done, to get production moving.
All right, we're nearly there. Just a couple more seconds, and then I'll share the results. Okay. There you go.
Great. All right. So, real spread of responses today. So about 15% in less than 20 and 20 to 40, 30% in 40 to 60. That's interesting. 30% in 60 to 80. And then we've got 11% in more than 80%. So if we look at this, the majority, so we're looking at 60, 70, 71% of organizations on the line right now are saying that more than 40% of their organization experience pressure to prioritize production over safety. Wow. Okay. Well, we're gonna dive into the research in just a moment to share with you what our findings are. And the way that we've come about our findings is through the diagnostic processes we run with the many organizations that we work with. So we run a qualitative and quantitative diagnostic process, which taps into 23 dimensions of safety culture. So when we look at safety culture, we look at people factors, environment factors, practices, policies and procedures, and leadership. And you can see on the right-hand side of your screen there some of the different factors that we dig into. Anything from the equipment and tools and machinery, through to contractor management, supervisor safety commitment, and willingness to report incidents. And in fact, one of the factors that we see as a real indicator of where a culture is at is this prioritization of production over safety and how many people feel that on a regular basis. So the particular sample group that we're going to tap into for this study is about 11,500 participants from 7 industries. So mining, manufacturing, oil and gas, education, utilities, agriculture, and industrial services. And what that research found is that 28% experience pressure from their direct supervisor to prioritize production over safety in the last 3 months. And if you dive a little bit deeper, 40% experience this on a weekly basis. So if you tie this, if you look at this in a bit more detail, what that means is in an organization of 3,000 people, 850 experience production pressure, and 340 of them experience pressure, and 340 of those experience it on a weekly basis. So that's a better representative of me describing it. So it goes 3,850 to 340. So that means, in a typical organization of 3,000 people, 340 people on a weekly basis are under that pressure. Now, some of the numbers that we saw come through on the screen here was up around that 40 plus component. So the numbers could be much more significant for your organization. So a quick polling question again for you here is, which group do you think experiences production pressure the most? So we'll give you 3 sort of high level categories to think about this in. One is frontline leaders, one is frontline workers, one is frontline leaders, one is managers. So which group, if you were to think broadly across your organization, do you think would experience production pressure the most? Frontline leaders, frontline workers, frontline leaders, or managers?
Just a few more seconds and then I'll share this.
Thank you.
Okay, here you go.
Great. Okay, so the results are through, and fairly predictably, frontline workers have come through as the most significant share here, so 52%, then frontline leaders 38%, and then managers at 3%, 10%. So what we're saying is that more than half of the production pressure sits with frontline workers, and then 38% with frontline leaders, and then only 10% with managers. So let's have a look at what our research found around who experiences the pressure. So what we found is that frontline workers are about 15% of employees who experience pressure over a 3-month period. So they sat at about 19% there. Actually, frontline leaders sat at 21%. So they experienced more reported production pressure than the frontline workers themselves. And in our particular study, the managers experienced the same amount of pressure, production pressure, as the frontline leaders. So what this tells us is that within the organizations that we worked with, it wasn't about individuals in different leadership roles necessarily applying the pressure on other people. It came down to a lot of organizational factors, which are actually driving that production pressure throughout the organization. And what we found is that in a lot of these organizations that we worked with, is that in many regards, frontline leaders often became nearly the filters from the pressure coming down from the more senior levels of management. We tended to see, particularly in the less mature organizations that we're going to talk about, a closer relationship between the frontline leaders and the frontline workers, often because they work together on a day-to-day basis. So there tended to be a stronger camaraderie there, and then a distance or a separation to the management. So a reflection point is, what would this look like in your organization? And as a leader, are you comfortable with the fact that it might be that if you were to dig under the surface, production pressure is more than a frontline issue. And in fact, the production pressure could be a systemic issue. It could be an issue that's actually coming right from the top of the organization or even potentially from the board. So worth reflecting on. Where do you think the production pressure in your organization sits most squarely, and where do we think it's radiating from? Now, why is it important to have this conversation? Why is it important to talk about production pressure in relation to safety? And it's quite simple, really, as you're probably aware. Employees who are under pressure to prioritize production over safety are more likely to cut corners and take unnecessary risks. The she'll be right kind of attitude comes through. They're more likely to hide incidents and errors. So underreporting becomes a factor here. And they're more likely to operate within a negative safety culture. And there's a bunch of different factors that plug into a negative safety culture. But at a high level, it's an attitude that we see safety as a cost rather than an investment. So the general attitude or perception or frame around safety is one that it's too hard, it takes too much time, it gets in the way of getting the job done, and management only cares about it when something goes wrong. So it's often within these negative safety cultures that the safety brand is a tarnished one. You know, you say the word safety within these organizations and people's eyes roll back and they put their sunglasses on and they disengage. That makes it really difficult to drive change initiatives and drive positive safety initiatives throughout organizations. So let's talk a bit more broadly now about the impact of this production pressure and the impact of leadership and culture on this particular outcome. I'm going to share a video with you in a moment. There's actually a real story off a site that one of our consultants at Sentis here experienced, and they've replayed it and we've put it in video form. And I think it really talks to the challenges that the brand of safety will have in these types of organizations where cynicism and a disconnect between safety and production has started to play out. Have a listen and see whether this is at all familiar for your organization.
Oh, thought there was a problem for a second. That's fine.
All right, I'm told that we've had a few challenges with sound there. So I'll do my best to replay what we're talking about there. So, and we'll also provide a link to that video for people to watch later on if they choose to. But essentially what we're talking about there is that there's certain impacts of leadership on culture, which mean that safety becomes a priority when leaders are around. And often it's when we've got that inconsistent message between production and safety that we get that two-speed safety culture. So We'll talk a little bit about culture more broadly, and we'll talk about next the impacts of culture. So when we talk about culture, we use our Sentis safety culture maturity model. And what this culture maturity model talks to is people's general approaches to safety. So the way that they think and feel about safety within the organization, as opposed to necessarily focusing in and zeroing in this instance on, say, the maturity of systems or processes. So I'll quickly cover some of these off with you. So if we start on the left-hand side at counterproductivity, this is a general attitude or perception within the organization that the company doesn't care much about me or my safety. So I don't care. So I don't care much about anything besides looking out for myself and getting the job done. So we've got low levels of potential organizational engagement and commitment to safety, and it's very much a each person for themselves kind of mindset. We move up a little bit more maturity here, and we generally see here a public compliance environment. So this is where safety procedures are seen as a burden of getting the job done, and I'll follow them when management is looking. And the example that we saw in that video is just that. The public compliance, there's one way of doing things when the boss is around, there's a complete other way of doing things when the boss isn't around. And this is often indicative of the maturity of leadership within organizations. If you've got a public compliance set of attitudes at the workforce level, that's often where safety sits from a management perspective as well, because they're doing safety because it's been imposed on them. At private compliance, we see a big shift. At private compliance, this is really where we see the dial shift, and we see people taking more personal accountability and responsibility of safety. They see the why and the what's in it for me. At mateship, we start to see teams really tightly looking out for one another. And at citizenship, this is where the company's safety is a core part of everyone's job. Safety is actually seen as an enabler and a positive driver of performance within an organization. The impact of this is as follows. So counterproductive, failure to follow rules, sabotaging, engaging in deliberately unsafe acts. At public compliance, we see a tick and flick mentality, an approach to safety, only does the right thing when the boss is around. At private compliance, with systems is based on personal choice. So we start to see that increase in maturity. At mateship, we see the team pulling together, challenging each other around unsafe behaviours, looking out for one another. And at citizenship, what we see is individuals looking for ways to improve safety, and we'll see safety initiatives bubbling up from the workforce. What the data tells us is that there's huge impact on organizations' willingness to report against each of these particular areas. And this willingness to report, as we spoke about earlier, is often really closely linked to that production pressure idea. So we see at counterproductive, 23% of incidents go unreported. It jumps up at public compliance to 30%. Our suggestion is that often people are so reluctant to engage with our surveys and our engagements at the counterproductive, we're probably not getting the full story. At incident, as we said, public compliance, it goes to 30%. We see a decline as the maturity gets higher, so down to as low as 13% at the private compliance level. Interestingly, about 86% of organizations that we work with sit in these bottom two areas. So this idea of production over safety is a common challenge that we're seeing across Australia, New Zealand, and some of our international partners as well. What our research has said is that leadership is a key driver. We know that increased production pressure and poor safety production balance is indicative of poor leadership. So you can actually see the relationship, and we're going to show this in just a moment, between leadership and the production pressure and safety balance. We know that improved safety leadership leads to improved safety behaviours and performance. And in fact, our encouragement would be, if you want to shift your culture, shift your dial around this, the first thing you need to do is challenge your leadership group. The challenge with so many organisations is that only 1 in 4 leaders are reported as demonstrating strong safety leadership as reported by their direct reports. So this is a reporting up perspective. So only 1 in 4 leaders are perceived to really walk the talk and talk the talk when it comes to safety. So as we can see from this really simple diagram, the impact of poor safety leadership on organizational culture is it actually drives the things that we want to see less of up. So in these sorts of cultures, we see more counterproductive and public compliance style behaviors and attitudes. So this is negative safety culture behaviors and attitudes with low discretionary effort. So very low effort being put into safety. And private compliance, mateship, and citizenship behaviors. So these are the more positive safety behaviors. These are safety behaviors where people are actually taking responsibility and accountability for their safety. Those behaviors tend to be driven downwards. And often, I don't think leaders are typically going out and going, right, we want people to behave less safely, but the way the system and the process is set up, it actually leads people to put in less discretionary effort and means that people are often punished for engaging in effective safety. On the flip side, what we tend to see is where leadership is stronger, safety leadership is stronger, they challenge more effectively the negative safety culture behaviors, and they tend to facilitate more of the positive safety culture behaviors. So we'll dive a little bit into how do we create a culture of safe production now. First of all, it's important to understand what are the organizational factors that are potentially driving the negative outcomes that you're getting from safety. Why is it that people perceive that production is prioritized over safety? Well, as we spoke about before, people across your organization, from your managers all the way down your front line, are likely to be experiencing similar sorts of pressures if this is a challenge for your organization. So the first place we typically identify is what targets are we setting. What we typically find is in these organizations, we'll talk a lot of safety, maybe we'll say, safety is our number one priority, or zero harm. We might have posters, we might talk about it all of the time. We go, well, why isn't anything changing? If at the fundamental cause of how the business, the fundamental core of how the business is structured doesn't support it, you're going to run up against that every single time. So first of all, what are your KPIs focused on? What are your production KPIs? And what are your safety KPIs? Typically what we see in these organizations is really strong focuses on production KPIs. This is one where there's a production over safety focus, really strong production KPIs, and the safety KPIs are lag safety KPIs. So what that means is as long as we're not hurting people, there's an absence of something, well, we can continue to drive towards that production outcome. Now, what that drives is quite logically underreporting, hiding things, covering things up, or a perception that everything's going fine because we're not getting that safety reporting, where in fact there may be a lot of high potentials and near misses, or a whole range of different factors taking place. The next big one is around reward and recognition. What we focus on, what we reward, is what we're going to get more of. So if we have a reward and recognition program that reinforces these KPIs, it makes it even worse. So, I've seen places where you can have, if we do 100 days incident free, everyone gets a reward, often a monetary reward, and quite a significant monetary reward often. The impact is, if I'm the one who gets hurt or is involved in an incident on day 99 of those 100 days, what's the likelihood that I'm actually going to report and let the rest of my teams down? So it creates social pressure as well for people not to report and to drive the negative behaviors. On the flip side, if you've obviously got strong production KPIs, then there's it's a double negative in terms of people's motivation to engage with safety effectively. Contract structure and selection process is another huge one. Think about your own procurement processes. Are they based on financial outcomes predominantly? Are they, and how are we setting those up for our contractors? It's often the case that we will see in cultures where there's perceived production pressure over safety, that you set very tight time frames for contractors. They get the dirty job, they get the hard and fast jobs, and we shift the problem over to someone else in those instances, and then we wonder why an incident occurs. So sitting back and thinking about, well, what is it we're trying to achieve with our partners? How are we going to get to that outcome? And is that contract structured in a way that enables our contractors and our support people to be able to effectively execute? And then the last big one here is leader complacency and capability. So some leaders just lead the way they've been taught, and they don't necessarily think or understand the impact of their behaviours and what they reward and recognise within an organisation. So that again, that individual capability will mean that you can have an organisation which is quite immature as a whole from a safety culture perspective, but you might actually find little hubs within that organization which are quite strong, and often that'll be quite leader dependent because that leader knows how to drive the right sort of outcomes. So a couple of things to think about and reflect on for your organization. Another quick poll here. Which of the following do you feel contributes most to production pressure in your organization? So from what I'm hearing on the poll so far, many of us are experiencing quite a lot of production pressure. What are the drivers? Is it KPIs tied to production / lag data, reward programs tied to production KPIs, contractor selection, leader complacency and capability, or other / none of the above? I think you can click more than one, as I understand. If it's a couple of those factors, feel free to put in more than one.
I don't think they can.
Oh, my apologies, Sarah.
I didn't know.
Working across a couple of platforms, my apologies.
Okay.
So we'll get some of those in and see what people think are the key drivers.
Just a few more seconds.
Great.
Okay, I will share that now.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you all for responding. All right, what have we got here? So looks like the top driver here is leader complacency and capability. So about 42% people are suggesting that's one of the key drivers. Then number two, unsurprisingly, is KPIs tied to production / lag data. And then the reward recognition systems, contractor selection, and other were the lesser ones. So it looks like the two significant ones are leader capability and KPIs tied to production / lag data. And you can imagine how those two things could have such a huge amplifying effect on one another. If you've got KPIs tied to production / lag indicator for a leader who doesn't really understand the implications of that, or doesn't understand their role in maybe filtering that data and sending an effective message to the workforce, that leader will just be driving those particular outcomes even harder, which makes it more and more challenging for people to put the right priorities in place. So reflecting on this, what we'd challenge you to think about is these couple of key factors for your organization. What are your KPIs? And are they effective in driving the results that you want? So when it comes to KPIs, I challenge you to think about KPIs in a really simple. People get really lost in the lead versus lag indicator piece. Another way that we'll often talk about it is positive and negative. So when we talk about negative indicators, these are numbers that we want to track down. And they're the typical things which organizations have in place, like your lost time injury frequency rates, your high potentials, whatever the case may be. When we talk about lead indicators, it's things that you are hypothesizing that if you do more of these, it will have an impact on those lag indicators down the line. So that might be in-field interactions, safety conversations, maybe it might be near miss reporting, those types of things. So what's the balance that you've got within your safety KPIs, and what level of focus are you and your leaders putting on each of those? Flicking to the next component here, look at your reward and recognition programs. Again, if you have reward and recognition programs in place, what are they rewarding and what are they recognizing? If you don't have any in place, what is it that you think you want to see more of that you would want to reward to create a more positive focus on safety? Perhaps it's the best safety initiative of the month. you can make this quite a values-based focus as well, as we've spoken about in some of the other webinars. So organizations who do this really effectively will have peer-on-peer opportunities to reward and recognize each other based on people living the values of your organization effectively and applying those values to safety in particular. So again, consider what is your reward and recognition program and what could be the unwanted consequences of those. The next one is consider your contract selection process. So this sounds like less of a challenge for people on the call, however, worth considering anyway. You know, with your contractors, do they feel like they've got adequate time, adequate ability to raise issues? What's the quality of the relationship that you've got with them? You know, a lot of that comes down to how the contract is set up right from the get-go. Is it a master servant kind of relationship, or is it an opportunity for you to talk as peers and come to a mutually beneficial outcome? And lastly, look at the quality or the capability of your leaders. Often we'll find that leaders, particularly at the front line, they have had very little investment when it comes to being able to effectively put equal priority on safety and production. So, and again, that was highlighted for a number of people on this call. So are you confident that even if you do have a good set of KPIs and a good reward and recognition process in place, that your leaders, your managers within your organization have the tools to effectively drive and communicate the right messages and drive the right sorts of behaviors? So there are a couple of tips there, but if you wanted to start to tackle this in a fairly logical fashion, and you want to get started, maybe it's a project that you want to consider over Christmas for the new year. First of all, we'd be challenging you to think about how can you understand the organizational context and barriers to achieving your current objectives. So often we think we know what's going on in our organizations, but it isn't until we talk to our people and we really look under the hood that we actually understand, hey, look, the way that we've got our system set up or the messages that we're sending, our intent was that we're trying to drive this behavior, but the actual message that people are getting is quite different. So spend some time exploring what's working and what's not working within your organization. One of the key differences between high-performing safety cultures and those that aren't often comes down to people having a clear and common goal to focus on. And this is just our last webinar that we spoke about as well. So do you have a clear safety vision within your organization? Do your values talk to your vision? And do both of these tie to the organizational strategy? Is it easily understood? If your safety vision and mission and strategy doesn't talk to your organizational strategy, safety is going to be perceived to get in a way. So if you really want to see safety as an enabler, it needs to align, it needs to talk to one another. Again, go back, watch some of our other webinars if it's of use. But again, a vision needs to be something that inspires and engages your workforce. So there's some tips and tricks in that past webinar if you would like to go in and dig a little bit deeper. The next big challenge that organizations will face is alignment around what good safety looks like. And often if you've got a clear vision and strategy, that makes it a lot more effective for management commitment to come into place. And again, one of the key drivers of strong safety cultures is perceived strong leadership commitment. So getting your leaders aligned on board with that vision and strategy, get that happening. Next one is, of course, review your KPIs once you know what you're trying to achieve. What gets measured gets done. So KPIs are important, but are we measuring the right sorts of behaviors, and is there a balance? So we're never going to get rid of those lag indicators in the foreseeable future. They're there for a reason. However, can we counterbalance them with things that people can proactively do as opposed to avoid? Next, how do we reward and recognize the types of behaviors we want to see more of? What we know is that we walk past so many safe behaviors on a day-to-day basis, and we tend to focus on what isn't working. So by focusing on giving the workforce what you want to see more of, rewarding, recognizing it, and focusing on it, we can start to bring some balance back into our cultures, and safety stops being seen as a big stick by management and more as an organizational enabler. And then finally, equip your managers with the leadership tools to effectively communicate safety messages. So again, sometimes it's really easy to communicate around safety when things are going to plan, but does all that go out the window when the plan goes to custard? So giving your leaders some of the skills and an understanding of what's in their sphere of control when it comes to communicating and leading their safety, their teams around safety is critically important. When it comes to equipping your leaders, so important to understand the organizational context. What are the factors which make your leaders effective and ineffective on a day-to-day basis? It's one thing to focus on the development of that leader, but unless we know the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis and we understand that context, sometimes our development initiatives can fall by the wayside. So spending time to investigate what are the factors around a leader that are contributing to the outcomes, not just focusing on the leader themselves, is one of our strong recommendations. It can be useful to give leaders some insights. Often people will have a perception of how effective they are at something that's very different to actual fact. And in fact, our 360 data often tells us that leaders rank themselves about 25% higher at certain safety leadership skills than their direct reports. So that's a challenge if we think we're really good at something and perhaps we're not as good as what we thought. Again, what we really promote is not only targeting behaviours, but targeting attitudes. So in order for people to truly, I guess, engage in the sorts of safety behaviours that are going to drive that positive safety culture, they need to believe in it first of all. So a program which helps leaders to understand the why, the what's in it for me of safety is critically important. And then finally, many organisations are doing this. A one-off training event will have some effect, but if you really want to create change, it takes more than a one-stop shop. So providing some sort of coaching or ongoing support for those leaders would be the other recommendation. So a reflection for you based on the information that we've shared is, as a leader, what are you willing to change? Is there anything here that you've identified for yourself or for your organization that's within your sphere of control or within your sphere of influence to go and drive some different outcomes for? So we're going to ask for some questions in now. So if you want to start popping those in, we can answer those in just a moment. Before we get there, if you want to read more about the information that we've shared, as I mentioned earlier, we have some really good links to this information. So you can go to our website, sentis.com.au/insights. You can download our safety leadership resource. So feel free to do that. We've also got a couple of offers. One is around our intensive leadership program. Actually, Sarah, I don't know whether we're doing that one anymore. Look, we might take that one off there, Sarah, and we might focus on the next one, which is the Leading Resilience Masterclass. So the next offer that we have is this Leading Resilience Masterclass. So what we've found is through COVID, we've got some real people who are experiencing challenges and knowing how to address safety within their organizations and resilience within their organizations. So this is a 3 times 90-minute webinar with supporting resources at quite a cost-effective price that enables you to jump online with a bunch of peers from other organizations and discuss strategies and ways of driving strong resilience within your organization. So it leverages the same sorts of tools that we've spoken about today. And if you're interested in getting contacted by one of our team, Nivo will get in contact with you if you click yes, or if you're not interested, feel free to click no.
So while we're doing that, and there is another poll as well that James, a question that James gave me, which I'll put up, but there's a question that you might want to answer now from Dorothy. Who gives the leaders scope, authority, etc., and how does the leader above the leader get to know about safety?
Look, I think really if you want to effectively if you want to effectively drive a positive safety outcome, this really does need to start at the most senior parts of your organization. It's really difficult to drive any sort of sustainable change across your organization unless you have an executive team and a CEO who who gets it and values it. So the big conversations happen at the executive level. I'd probably argue that governance can play a very strong role in this as well. You know, I think the organisations who do this really well, it's driven from the board, and the board gets this. So, Dorothy, the challenge I think you may face is it's not something you can start at middle management with and necessarily always effectively implement. It needs to start at the executive. If these behaviours are existing on the floor, I'd be suggesting they're existing in your executive.
Okay, well, I've shared that other poll. We don't have any other questions at the moment. So I think that everyone already understands that we do send an email out later today with contact details for Anthony. So if you have any questions, you can certainly contact him that way. So I think that might be it. Anthony, that was great. Thank you very much. So I hope everyone has a really good rest of their week. And thank you, Anthony. There is a bit of feedback coming through from the chat. It's a fabulous webinar. That seems to be consistent with your webinars. And hopefully we'll get to do a few more next year. That would be great.
Looking forward to it. And everyone have a safe and happy break, and look forward to catching you all in the new year.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you later. Bye.
Take care. Bye.